Welcome back to Tales of Knights and Magic. Subscribe if you like, and now get comfortable and enjoy this glimpse into the world of fantasy. The city had no name worth remembering. Maps called it Relgard once, back when kings built walls and merchants claimed titles, but no one used that name anymore. People called it the Pit, or the Roost, or the Sink, depending on how deep they'd sunk and how long they planned to stay. It wasn't a place people came to, it was where you ended up after the world had chewed you apart. Slums layered on markets, layered on manors, all built crooked over stone, that cracked with every season. Magic drifted through it like smoke, cheap, dirty, stolen. Half the city ran on flux stones, no one could trace. The other half ran on blood. No guards, no laws, just crews, colors and coin, and in the middle of it, brushing dust off a burned coat and checking the seams of his gloves, was a man named Kren. He stood in the shell of what used to be a tavern, now half rubble and half memory. A chalk mark still stained the back wall. A ward line from a failed shield spell, probably cast mid-raid. The floor stank of old booze, copper, and something worse. Kren didn't flinch. He crouched beside a shattered table, fingers tracing the ground. His left glove sparked faintly, just enough to tell him the flux signature was still active. That meant whoever did this hadn't covered their tracks. He stood, adjusted his belt and walked out. The streets were layered in grime and noise. Market rows spilled into alley paths, broken bricks stacked in makeshift ladders. Kids ran messages for scraps. Beggars watched everything. Kren moved through them like a blade, quiet, but sharp. He didn't carry a visible weapon, just a single shoulder pauldron over his left arm, and a thick belt of pouches no one had the nerve to reach for. The gloves were reinforced, not for spellcasting, but for striking. Close combat mages weren't rare in theory. Just useless, too dangerous to be trusted with formations, too clumsy to serve in formations, and too magical to be ignored. Kren wore the title like a scar. His destination wasn't far. A squat tenement buried behind a collapsed aqueduct, roofed with scavenged plates and dotted with ward tags meant to keep out curses. He stepped inside without knocking. The woman in the corner was already reaching for her knife. She relaxed only slightly when she saw his face. "He's not here," she said. Her voice was rough with sleep and smoke. "Didn't come back last night." Kren nodded. "He was seen near Carver Row, East Edge." She laughed without humor. "Then he's already dead." Kren didn't respond. He walked to the table, picked up a half-burned sigil stub and sniffed it. Smelled like alchemic wax and rotten silk. Cheap ward trigger, probably black market. He turned to her. "If you find the blade he used, keep it." She frowned. "Why?" He answered simply. "I'm going to bury his killers in it." The east edge of Carver Row was where the ground sagged inward, making all the buildings lean like they were whispering secrets. Two gangs controlled the area, the Spikes and the Ash Boys. Spikes wore metal hooks from their collars, liked acid blades and drinkable fire. The Ash Boys wore masks of burned cloth and smeared themselves with soot. Neither group worked with outsiders. Both hated mages. Kren stepped into the open and let his gloves pulse once. That was enough. Word would spread. He didn't hide. He wanted them to come. They did. First one, then 3, then 7. Mostly boys. One woman, tall and fast, moved like she'd survived more than she should have. They surrounded him in the clearing behind a glass blower's stall. Broken panes crunched underfoot. No one spoke. The woman stepped forward, holding a short blade with a notched edge that shimmered with curse oil. "You don't belong here," she said. Kren stepped forward once. "One of yours killed a runner, burned a tavern, didn't cover their tracks." She smiled like a wolf. "And you're going to punish us?" Kren's gloves flared, not bright, not loud, just enough to hum. "I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again." She lunged. The others followed. Kren didn't cast spells. He broke them. His gloves weren't conduits. They were inhibitors, laced with flux-absorbing threads and pressure notes. When the first blade came down, he caught it with an open palm. The curse flared and died. His other fist hit the attacker's shoulder, driving bone into dirt. He turned, ducked, let another strike pass over his head, then slammed his elbow into a mask and followed it with a punch that cracked teeth. The woman was fast. Her blade moved like a ribbon, striking in circles. He didn't block it. He stepped through it. One glove caught her arm. The other broke her knee. She fell with a grunt, silent, professional. The others fled. He stood in the broken glass and caught his breath. Blood on his sleeve, not his. He walked to the woman, crouched. "Name," she spat. He wiped the spit from his glove and answered anyway. She stared at him. "Never heard of you." He nodded. "You will." He left her breathing. That was deliberate. She would spread the word. Someone was cleaning up. Not for a game. Not for a name. just to stop people like her from doing what they'd done. He didn't need to explain himself. Not yet. Back at the tenement, the woman had vanished. The boy's body had been moved, burned, probably by the Ash Boys, to hide evidence. Kren didn't care. He didn't need the corpse, he had the memory. He knelt beside the hearth and marked a sigil in the ash, low-level memory tether. It bound the intent of the space to a thought. When anyone stepped into the room, they'd feel what happened there, not the pain, the consequence. He ate cold bread that night on the roof, watching firelight dance across the slums. He didn't sleep. The city had rules, even without law. Break too many, and you didn't last. He'd broken one tonight. He'd made a statement. That was dangerous. People would notice. They did. The next day, 2 men found him near the corner market. They weren't thugs. Their coats were clean. Their boots too expensive for this district. One wore a ring with a shifting stone, rune-tied. The other had his fingernails trimmed short, military style. They walked like they expected him to talk first. Kren didn't. The taller one finally spoke. Heard someone's claiming justice down in the pits. Kren raised an eyebrow, claimed making noise, breaking gangs, leaving symbols. That you? Kren shrugged. I break what needs breaking. The shorter man chuckled. That's so. And what's your price? Kren looked at him. Peace. They didn't like that. Too clean. Too hard to control. They left with a warning he didn't listen to. But they weren't alone. More people came over the next week. Some asked for help. Some offered jobs. Some warned him to stop. He didn't. He kept walking. Kept fighting. By the end of the second week, 3 gangs had folded. Not gone. Just reduced. Their leaders beaten. Their hideouts raided. Their crews scattered. He took nothing. Left nothing. No banner. No title. Just silence. And in that silence, people started watching. Some followed. One was a former brawler who'd lost his eye in a pit fight. Another was a girl who used to pickpocket charms and now wanted to learn how to cast her own. They didn't swear oaths. They didn't ask for permission. They just showed up. And so the first cracks of something bigger began. Kren didn't plan it, didn't draft rules or write orders, but he trained them. Showed them how to fight without drawing attention. How to cast simple flux grips that didn't glow. How to move between crowds without drawing eyes. How to punch in ways that didn't kill but stop. He taught them discipline, not righteousness. And one night, when a crew of drunk mercs tried to shake down a bakery near the center square, 6 of them were waiting. Not in armor, not with fanfare, just waiting. The mercs didn't make it to the door. That's when people started calling them something. They didn't agree on the name at first. Dust Knuckles, Wall Breakers, Gray Line. But the one that stuck came from a boy who watched from a second-story window and muttered it as the mercs were dragged away. City Guards. It wasn't official, but it felt true. Kren didn't accept the title. He didn't reject it either. The next day, someone painted a white line on a brick wall near the bakery. Just a single vertical slash, no crest, no signature. But people understood what it meant. So did the gangs. Retaliation came quickly. Not a challenge, not a raid, a message. They burned a house, killed a woman and her brother who lived near one of the marked walls. Kren arrived too late. The fire was still smoldering. He stood in the ash and didn't speak. Just stared. Denna, the girl who'd once picked pockets, stood beside him. What now? She asked. He didn't answer. That night, 3 gang houses burned. No one knew who did it. No names. No witnesses. Just silence. The city took notice. So did the crews in power. Kren sat in an alley behind a forge the next morning. Gloves off. Knuckles bloody. Across from him sat a man named Harvin. Older. Smarter. Wore rings on every finger and smiled like a merchant who knew too much. You're making noise, Harvin said. Kren didn't reply. People like you don't last here, Harvin continued. You try to be clean, you get dirty. You try to stay dirty, you get buried. Kren finally spoke. I'm not clean. Harvin smiled wider. No, but you're not one of us either. That's worse. Kren stood. I'm not here to join you. I'm here to replace you. Harvin didn't smile after that. Kren walked away. The forge behind him caught fire 2 days later. No one claimed it, but a white slash appeared on the stone wall next to it, and the city kept watching. There was a rhythm to violence in the city. One you could learn if you lived long enough. It wasn't about timing or force, or even who struck first. It was about who set the pace. Gangs didn't rule with swords or spells alone. They ruled with expectation. The fear that someone might be watching. The knowledge that if you crossed the wrong corner or wore the wrong mark, something would find you. It was control through rhythm. That rhythm had started to change. People still whispered the old gang names, still paid their bribes, still ducked their heads when a tattooed enforcer walked by. But something new had wormed into the beat of the streets. A stutter, a hesitation. Kren wasn't a myth, not yet, but he was becoming a disruption, and in a city that survived on momentum, disruption was dangerous. The city guards weren't a real faction, not yet. They had no official territory, no council, no coin stash or flux vault. They had no uniforms, no sigils, no banners. But they had presence. They had repetition, and in the alleys of District 3, repetition could become power if it lasted long enough. They patrolled no more than 6 blocks. That's all they could hold. 6 blocks of broken stone, slanted roofs, old trade houses, and a tangle of paths that fed into 2 crossroads and an abandoned granary. It was small, barely anything. But it was theirs. The first block had a healer who didn't ask questions. The second had a water cistern that had never run dry. The third had a crumbling tower where Dana trained younger recruits to think before they cast. The rest held nothing special except the fact that no one bled in those blocks without consequence. That was enough. Kren walked the edge of their claim that morning. The sky was a flat sheet of gray, and the air smelled of flux rot and boiling tar. His gloves were strapped and reinforced. His coat was mended again, shoulder to hem, with black thread that didn't quite match. He passed 2 beggars, 4 shop stalls, and a pair of kids scratching ward shapes into the mud. He didn't smile, didn't nod, but he saw them. And they saw him. That was the start of authority. Not law, not force. Recognition. In the granary, Evan waited, former pit brawler, now the loudest and most loyal of the early guard. His nose had been broken 4 times, and his smile was missing 2 teeth. But he moved like someone who'd been stabbed more often than questioned. Another tag on the east wall, Evan said as Kren approached. Hook shape, red lines through the middle. Not local. Kren frowned. Not spikes or ash. Evan shook his head. Too clean. Looks murk. That complicated things. The city had local crews, born from its gutters, raised in its chaos. But it also had buyers. Outsiders, lords and mages who funded mercenary outfits to protect their trade routes, control their slums, or wipe out competition. Merc crews didn't care about turf. They cared about contracts. If someone had hired one to test the city guards, it meant the right people were paying attention. The wrong people too. Where was the tag? Kren asked. Black Lane. Near the fish gate. That was barely a street away from guard-held ground. Give it 12 hours, Kren said, then remove it. Evan raised a brow. Why wait? Because I want them to see it burn. The mercs came before sundown, 3 of them. No insignia, no house colors, but their coats were too clean, their blades too polished, and they walked like men who thought reputation was armor. One carried a staff with rotating flux nodes. The others had short axes bound with rune cord. Not subtle, not scared. They didn't step into guard ground directly. That would have been declaration. Instead, they stopped just short of the white line painted across the stone arch that marked the edge of claim. They leaned against a wall, laughed loudly, smoked something that smelled like crushed bone flour, and waited provocation. Kren didn't answer it. Instead, he sent Dina to speak. She was smaller, quicker, younger, still learning, still testing her limits. But she had sharp eyes and a voice that cut through noise like clear water. She walked to the edge of the line, didn't cross it, and said 3 words. You're being watched. The Mercian with the staff grinned. That's the idea. Dina didn't flinch. You want to fight? The one with the cord axes cracked his neck. We want a paycheck. She nodded once, then walked away. They let her. 10 minutes later, a bolt of flux detonated the post behind them. Not targeted, just close. A warning. Their laughter stopped. They left before dark. The next morning, their tag was gone. Not scraped. Burned. The city noticed. Whispers spread. The White Line faction didn't just handle thugs. They weren't just local muscle. They'd warned off a merc crew. Without dying. Without bragging. That kind of discipline was rare. That kind of restraint meant something worse. Intention. Kren spent that week reinforcing their perimeter. Not with soldiers, with signal, a color change in the paint tags, a new pattern in how patrols rotated, a shift in the sound chimes hung across alley entries. To most it was invisible. To those who paid attention, it was structure. That's when the invitation came. A folded letter slipped under the granary door, bound with gold string. No name, just a sigil. 3 interlocking blades over a flame. House Nelwyn, one of the oldest merchant dynasties still operating in the city, though no one knew what they actually sold. The letter invited Kren to a gathering. Not a meeting, a gathering. which meant nobles, which meant politics. Avon wanted to ignore it, Dina wanted to burn it. Kren read it twice and said, "I'm going." They met in a tower that hadn't collapsed yet, stone polished, floors covered in black laced carpets from the northern provinces. Magic lingered in the corners, subtle, passive, security spells, and listening barriers. A dozen men and women stood around a table that wasn't a table. It was a map, three-dimensional and moving. Their hands were clean, their voices were calm, and every one of them looked at Kren like he was the idea of a man, not the thing itself. The host was a woman named Vale. She wore red gloves and had teeth too perfect to be real. She smiled like she knew secrets she'd never have to say. "You've been busy," she said. Kren said nothing. "You've upset balances," she added, removed pieces we'd placed carefully. Still nothing. Another man, broader, less patient, leaned forward. "We want to know if you're building a guild, a cult, or an army." Kren answered then, "None of those." The room still. "Then what are you building?" Vale asked. Kren looked at her. A consequence. Silence. Then laughter. Not mocking, curious, nervous, ambitious, she said. He nodded. "You invited me here, not to stop me, to see if I could be used." Vale didn't deny it. "Everyone's you. You may as well choose your price." "I have." "And what is it?" He met her gaze. "You keep your people out of our blocks. No bribes, no jobs, no leashes. And if we don't, then we become more than a consequence." She didn't smile after that. He left the tower alive. That was enough. 2 days later, the guard's territory expanded, not by force, by request. The butcher on Frost Alley asked for a patrol. The weaver on Lowbrick offered food for watch shifts. The candle maker cleared a space behind his shop for storage. Nothing official, nothing signed, but everyone understood. The city guards weren't just fighting, they were replacing. Kren sat alone that night in the top floor of the tower. Dana had claimed as a training hall. He cleaned his gloves slowly, brushing blood from the seams with a rag soaked in steam-root oil. He thought of the boy who died in the tavern. The first one. The one no one remembered anymore. He whispered a name he hadn't spoken in weeks. And outside, the city shuddered again. Because the rhythm had changed, and Kren wasn't following it. He was writing it. The city never slept. It just shifted shape depending on who was watching. At dawn, it belonged to the ash collectors, the water haulers, the burnt-eyed flux handlers pushing carts of volatile stones before the heat rose. At midday it belonged to merchants and thieves. By dusk it was the game. But at night, deep night past the third bell and before the horizon bled, there was no owner. No rule. The streets ran hollow, watched only by things that didn't blink, didn't breathe, and didn't care about human names. That was when Kren liked to move. When no one claimed anything, and he could think. He walked the perimeter of their blocks alone that night, boots steady, gloves uncharged. People whispered now when he passed, not out of reverence but uncertainty. He wasn't a myth, not yet, but his shape was changing. The idea of what he was had started to grow beyond what he'd actually done. That made him dangerous. Not because of what he could do, but because of what others expected him to do. 2 more white slashes had appeared that week without his order. One on a drainage wall behind the fifth sister, another above the shuttered window of the old distiller's guild. The paint was accurate. The curve was right. The spacing perfect. Not imitation. Repetition. Whoever placed them had studied the lines, learned the weight behind the gesture. The city had begun responding to the pattern. Kren didn't like it. He hadn't decided what the mark meant, and already people were claiming it. A young woman named Skella had dragged a pickpocket into the garden yesterday and forced him to clean floors for 3 hours because he'd crossed the line with stolen goods. No one stopped her. Oven found out later and laughed about it. Kren hadn't laughed. It wasn't that she was wrong. It was that she'd done it without asking. He sat in the upper room of the granary after patrol, sharpening the edge of a copper-threaded pry bar he used more for opening flux vaults than for fighting. Oven sat across from him, with a mug of something green that steamed and smelled like spoiled citrus. "We're going to need coin," Oven said. "Not now, but soon. People want food, beds, tools, paint." Kren didn't look up. "We don't tax," Oven grunted. "Not asking for that. I'm saying we need to survive. We're past fists and discipline. You want to hold ground, you need scaffolds. Tunnels. Blacksmiths who aren't terrified of being paid in good intentions." Kren nodded. He knew Oven was right, but they had no infrastructure, no treasury. They existed entirely on the edge of favors and memory. Danny arrived half an hour later, hair pulled back in a tight braid. Eyes sharper than usual. She dropped a folded piece of waxed cloth on the table between them. Kren opened it and found a list. Names. All women, all flux casters. All dead. Poisoned, she said. Lowburn District. Someone's cleaning out spellmakers under 40. Kren frowned. No patterns? Not spell type, not house. But each one had ties to the old Caster Guild. That was more than a problem. The Caster Guild had collapsed years ago, but its remnants still had reach. They trained the hedge witches, the threadbinders, the illusion peddlers, who filled the gaps between real magic and cheap tricks. If someone was killing them, it wasn't personal. It was deliberate. We find out who ordered it, Kren said. We don't step in until we know what they're afraid of. Dane nodded, and Ivan swore under his breath. We're not ready for that game. Kren looked at him. We weren't ready for gangs either. Yeah, Ivan muttered. But we can punch gangs. That night, Kren took 2 volunteers and walked to Lowburn. They passed 4 barricades, bribed a cursemonger to let them cross the cracked aqueduct, and entered a district lit only by fungal glow and half-dead torchweed vine. The first body was still on display, pinned to the side of a burned-out carriage, throat slashed, flux threads still hissing faintly in her wrists. Kren examined the cut. Precise. Too clean for panic. He found a mark burned into the iron hub of the cart. 3 dots above a line. It wasn't a known crew sign. Not one from the city. One of his men, Thomas, whistled low. Foreigners? Worse, Kren said. Amateurs who think they're professionals. They followed the scent of old spell residue to a cellar 5 streets east. There they found a second body. This one male still alive, barely. His left arm was gone. His right hand glowed faintly with binding flux. Kren crouched beside him. Who sent them? The man whispered something Kren couldn't hear. He leaned closer. The words were clear. You did. He died a moment later. Kren stood slowly, gloves flexing. Dane would later tell him that night was the first time she saw him, uncertain. Not afraid, uncertain. The message was nonsense. Meant to confuse, or meant to be true. They returned to the granary without speaking. Over the next week, more bodies appeared. 2 in the northern alleys, 1 floating in a flux drain. 1 left propped against the fountain in the far square, posed like a statue with a sign nailed to its chest. Justice isn't yours. Someone was challenging the idea of the city guards directly, not with force, with reflection. They weren't destroying anything. They were mimicking, copying the shape, reversing it, that made them harder to fight. You couldn't punch an idea, you had to define it. Kren gathered everyone in the broken courtyard behind the granary. 42 people, fighters, casters, watchers. Every one of them had followed without oath, without reward. They stood in a circle and Kren walked into the center. Gloves off. No speeches, he said. No lies. He looked around. Someone is challenging what we are. Not by denying us, by being us better than we are. They kill and say it's justice. They punish and say it's order. They use our name. He paused. So now we decide what our name means. Silence. Then Dana stepped forward. It means you come back if you said you would. Evan followed. It means you don't take payment from hands that can't hold a blade. Another voice. It means we walk the edge, but we don't fall over it. Another. It means we bleed first. And another. It means they can't ignore us anymore. Kren didn't respond. He just nodded. That night, a message was painted across 6 walls in their blocks. Not a warning. Not a threat. Just a statement. This is guard ground. If you kill in silence, we will make you loud. The next day, 2 assassins were found tied to a post. Alive. Bloodied. But breathing. A new line appeared beneath the white slashes on the marked walls. Thin. Red. Horizontal. A warning line. A city like theirs didn't change because someone said so. It changed because enough people acted like it already had. And now the city was watching again, waiting to see if the guards were a story worth believing. Kren stood on the roof of the granary and watched the skyline pulse with the distant glimmer of mercenaries clashing in the south. Factions fighting over relics, over gold, over name. He didn't want a throne. He didn't want worship. He wanted quiet streets. And he'd cut through anything to get them. The granary shook at dawn, not from violence, but from the weight of bodies moving too fast inside its walls. Abane shouted from the stairwell. Donna dropped from the 2nd floor in a spin of boots and cloak. Kren was already halfway across the roof when the sky flashed. The light wasn't natural. It was green deep, sharp green with a seam of silver cutting through the center. and it came from the west, toward the broken towers of Quarter Void. Nobody used magic like that in the city. Not openly, not in the middle of gang territory. He landed on the next rooftop without thought, caught the edge with his gloved hand, rolled once and kept moving. The pulse echoed again. Every lantern in the district flickered. Water stopped running in the cisterns. The sky took on a brief shimmer, like looking through warped glass. Flux surged. High level. Kren reached the high ridge near Dust Alley, and dropped low. From there he saw it. A dome. Pure flux, clean and untainted. Rising from the street below like someone had carved a perfect hemisphere into the air, and filled it with trembling emerald light. It covered half a block. People stood at the edges, not daring to cross. Dina arrived beside him seconds later, breath tight, hair loose from her braid. That's not gang work. Kren nodded. No. That's a ritual. Anyone we know, nobody in the city has enough raw flow for that. Then they brought it from outside, which was a problem. Quartervine had belonged to a collective of 3 small gangs. The Coilmen, the Brickhooks, and a no-name crew that mostly ran scams out of tea shops. None of them had casters capable of that, and they'd all gone silent over the past 3 days. No scouts, no tags, no shakedowns. The kind of quiet that preceded a purge. Kren slid down the far side of the rooftop and made his way through a wrecked market path. The Flux Dome loomed higher now, its surface rippling like water that never stilled. Inside he saw shadows moving. Not figures, just hints. Dina joined him, and Evine arrived with 2 more. Rowan and Bricks, both solid, dependable and quiet when they needed to be. We can't break it, Rowan said after testing the edge with a steel rod. The metal sparked and melted on contact. This is alchemic structure, built to hold against siege. Dina squinted at it. It's anchored. See the pylons? Kren followed her gaze. 5 iron stakes driven into the cobblestone at equal distance around the dome, each wrapped in green threaded wire and humming with static. They're building something inside, she said, or destroying something. We're not waiting, Kren said. Even snort. You planning to walk through that? No. Kren stepped to the nearest pylon and knelt beside it. He studied the symbols, not ancient, not foreign. Familiar, city-made, he said, but altered. These are Caster Guild roots. Someone modified them. Brick spoke for the first time. To do what? To change the shape of space, Dina answered. They're thinning the wall between stable flux and raw source. Rowan grimaced. That's suicide. No, Kren said. It's leverage. They weren't trying to break the city. They were trying to bend it. Whoever cast this dome wanted control, not of one street, of influence. If they could prove they could shape reality inside the city's wild flux zones, they could stake a claim higher than any gang. This wasn't a takeover. It was a declaration, and the guards had to answer it. Kren didn't issue orders. He moved. The first pylon was made of layered brass and flux-hardened bone. He touched the base with his glove and felt the thread pull of power spiraling inward, not stable. He could disrupt it, but it would burn him. He glanced at Dina. On 3, they struck together. Her binding spell wrapped the top in a cocoon of thread light, and Kren punched the base. The feedback was immediate. A jolt of energy threw him backward 5 feet, arm numb, glove smoking. But the pylon cracked. Dina shouted, next. The dome faltered. Not much, but enough. People around the edge scattered. A hum filled the air, a pitch that made teeth ache. The shadows inside moved faster. They hit the second pylon, then the third. Rowan and Bricks covered them, holding back a wave of masked figures that surged from an alley with short blades and muffled cries. No one spoke. Kren punched the 4th pylon into dust. The dome began to collapse unevenly, flux twisting sideways, pulling heat from the air. The 5th pylon was gone, destroyed. In its place stood a figure draped in layers of ash-colored cloth, face hidden, hands bare. The man or woman held no weapon, but the flux moved around them, not rippling, rotating, like space itself deferred to their presence. They raised a hand. Kren's gloves caught fire. Not real fire, not heat, friction. The flux within them reversed, turned against itself. He dropped to one knee, teeth clenched, vision blurred. Dana shouted. A bolt of raw will lashed the figure. It dispersed, not blocked, redirected. Who are you? She asked. The figure didn't answer, just stepped forward. Kren surged to his feet, pain forgotten. He didn't think. He struck. The hit landed, solid, flesh and bone. The figure staggered, and for one moment, the ash fell back, revealing a face he recognized. Not by name, by type. Close combat mage, just like him. But refined, controlled, trained in a way he had never been. The figure smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just acknowledgement. Then they vanished. The dome fell, the street returned, and silence followed. For hours the city didn't speak. Then the rumors started. City guards had fought a sorcerer from the beyond, had punched through a dome, meant to kill an entire district, had stood against a trained caster and lived. By nightfall, 27 new people stood at the granary doors, asking to join. Not for coin, for cost. Kryn stood on the granary roof again that night, watching the horizon. Haven sat nearby, shirt half unbuttoned, arm in a sling. That wasn't some noble's pet project, Haven said. That was a message, a professional one. I know, Kryn said. They'll come back. I know that too. What are we gonna do about it? Kryn didn't answer. Below them, Dina was marking a new training schedule on the wall. Rowan and Bricks were sharpening blades. And the city listened. Not with ears, with attention. Because the city guards weren't just defending a block anymore. They were being measured, and the real war hadn't even begun. By the end of the week, the city guards were watching 7 blocks, not 6. The new block, called Millshade by the locals, had a collapsed flux line, no central cistern, and too many open alleys for Kryn's liking. It was a bad piece of territory to defend, and a worse one to patrol. But the residents had put up 3 white slashes on their own, and started passing information through the bakers and clothmongers, treating guard ground like it was already theirs. The moment that happened, Kryn hadn't claimed it, but now he had to hold it. That was the cost of reputation. The weight of someone else's belief becoming your responsibility. Dina was running new recruits through formation drills behind the granary when the first letter arrived. It was tucked into a hollow brick on the southern garden wall, sealed with brown wax and no sigil. That made it serious. Anyone could flash a house mark or gang stamp. But brown wax meant the message came from the city itself, not from its rulers, but its bone. The gutter spies, the alley scribes, the network of watchers who remembered everything because they survived everything. Kryn read it twice, memorized it, and burned it in a metal pan. A name, a location, a warning. Velmgare, 3rd bell. South Drainworks. No explanation. No plea. Just that. Kryn didn't bring anyone. The South Drainworks were older than most of the city's surface. Built by the Dust Kings 3 regimes back. Still half functional. Still haunted by rats bigger than dogs and whispers in the stone that only answered to certain names. The stairs into the underworks stank of rot and crushed lichen. The lights were out. Kryn moved by touch, tracing the damp stone until he reached the platform above the main flow trench. Velm was waiting. He stood beneath a shattered archway, hood down, bald head gleaming with sweat. His arms were bare and tattooed from knuckle to shoulder, runes that moved when he breathed. His eyes were wrong, too still, too empty, like someone who'd seen something important burn and had never blinked since. I told them you'd come, Velm said. Kryn didn't speak. Velm stepped forward. They're going to buy you or bleed you, Kryn. There won't be a third option. The dome wasn't a warning. It was a map. Every caster who saw it now knows where you are, and what you are. What am I? Velm smiled. A mistake. Kryn didn't react. Why warn me? Because I tried it once. 17 years ago. Same goal. Different style. I built a faction. I made rules. I bled for them. And when I got too strong they buried it all. The city, the people who claim to own it, who sell magic like wine and think justice is a tool, not a destination. They didn't kill me. They rewrote me, changed the story, burned the names. Now I walk the drains, and talk to ghosts. Kryn folded his arms. So why talk to me? Because you're not me. You're louder, smarter, meaner. You might actually last. What do you want? Velm's face changed. Not softened, hardened. I want you to survive. Then he threw a pouch across the gap. It landed at Kryn's feet with a heavy thud. Inside, 5 gray flux stones, perfectly cut, high density, clean caster grit, worth more than the granary and its entire stock. Use them before someone takes them, Velm said. They're tagged. Only respond to close contact mages. Kryn looked up. Who made them? Velm was already gone. He returned to the surface before 4th bell. Eyes sharp, shoulders tense. He didn't speak to anyone. Just locked the stones in the vault beneath the granary floor and marked the location with 3 chalk dots. Only Dena would recognize the pattern. That night, the watchfires lit. There were 5 across the city. Stone towers from the old royal district, still used by information brokers, merc guilds and crew captains to signal changes in territory. Lighting one meant a declaration. Lighting all 5 meant war. Kryn stood on the roof and watched them burn. Evan climbed up behind him, breath slow, hair damp from drills. Well, Evan muttered, someone's throwing a tantrum. Not a tantrum, Kryn said. A message. What's it say? that we got too loud. The next day, a councilman visited, not of the city's ruling body, those had vanished 3 kings ago, but of the surviving trade council, the real power behind the city's so-called neutral zones. His name was Arvin Sel, and he wore a coat lined with shifting ink, a prestige charm meant to keep attention focused on him during negotiations. Kren met him in the empty room above the weaver's hall. Dena watched from the stairs. Arvin didn't sit. You've disturbed the market. 3 of our partners have lost their secondary crews. We've had 6 reports of stolen tax from wards inside your blocks. You're pushing too hard. We don't tax, Kren said. Someone in your colors does. Then they'll be dealt with. Arvin narrowed his eye. This city isn't meant to be cleaned. It's meant to be managed. We prefer our blood measured. Kren stepped forward. Then you're not going to like what happens next. Arvin smiled. We already don't. He left without shaking hands. The next week was quiet. Too quiet. It wasn't peace. It was waiting. Dena ran combat drills 3 times a day. Arvin set traps along every alley mouth and 2 of the roofs. Kren set up a rotating watch schedule. The newer recruits started sleeping in armor, and Kren prepared. He didn't train. He went below the granary each night and worked with the flux stones Velm had given him, studying their pattern, testing their charge. They weren't normal. They didn't store energy. They amplified it. Built for contact mages only, they took raw kinetic magic and folded it back into the caster's movement, doubling impact. With 5, he could do more than strike. He could break. The attack came at midnight. Not loud, not reckless, just sudden. 3 points of entry. Rooftops, garden wall, rear alley. Coordinated, precise. A squad of 10, fully masked, equipped with flux-threaded weapons and displacer charms. These weren't mercs. These were trained killers, but the guards were ready. Dena dropped the first with a binding weave that folded his legs under him before he landed. Evan tackled the second off a rooftop and landed in a heap of stone and swearing. Kren found the third group near the old well. He didn't speak. He moved. Faster, cleaner, stronger. The stones did their work. His gloves flared as he struck blows folding armor, shattering enchantments. The first attacker went down hard. The second tried to teleport. Kren caught his wrist mid-cast and snapped it backward. The third tried to run. Kren let him. He followed him to the street, waited until they were clear, then he struck again. This time he didn't hold back. The body didn't move after it hit the ground. By dawn, 5 of the attackers were dead. 2 unconscious, 3 missing. No guards lost. No civilians touched. The city knew. By mid-morning, 7 new white slashes appeared across the city, some in places Kren had never visited. He didn't like it. It meant the idea had grown too big. It meant he had to decide soon what kind of leader he was going to be. Not the kind the city expected. The kind it couldn't kill. 3 days after the attack, the city changed its posture. Not in obvious ways. The markets opened, the alleys stayed full, the guilds moved coin. But underneath it all, the tension shifted. Traders whispered less. Runners moved in pairs. Ward chimes that used to ring every morning stayed silent. The balance had tipped, and the city wasn't sure which way it would fall. The city guards were being watched, not by enemies, but by the city itself. Its memory, its rhythm, its instinct for violence. Kren didn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. He made rounds at random hours, walked silent corners, studied new faces too long, memorized every wall mark that wasn't there the day before. People said nothing when he passed, but more of them stood straight. They didn't smile, they didn't cheer, they just made space. That was the beginning of fear, or the beginning of loyalty. Either one could grow. The attacker who lived stayed silent in the cell below the granary. His name wasn't known, but his gear was Merc standard. Collapsible blade, flux needles sewn into the collar, 2 layers of charm thread armor, sigil pattern unique to southern contract work. Not local, not rogue, contracted. Kren waited until the 3rd day before questioning him. No torch, no tricks, just a chair, a table, and 1 question. Who paid for the job? The man looked at him with empty eyes. I wasn't paid. Then what were you promised? A better city. This one's mine, that's why they sent me. Kren didn't respond. He waited eventually, the man added. They said if I killed you the city would stabilize. They called it a correction. Who's they? You know already, you just don't want to say the name. Kren left the room and sealed the door. That night, the man was gone. No signs of struggle. No breath. The cell just emptied. A message, not an escape. Something was cleaning its trail. The next morning, Dana handed Kren a list. It wasn't written by her, but she'd found it folded into her boot after drills. 17 names, all city guard, all marked with sigils, locations, movement, pattern. Someone was tracking them, mapping them, preparing something. We're being flanked, she said. Not by one crew, not by a faction. This is structure. This is council grade. Avon agreed. You don't try to erase a street unless it's doing something dangerous. Kren folded the list, set it on fire, and let the ashes scatter across the granary's courtyard. Then we stopped waiting. The first strike came that night. Not an attack, a removal. The Armory Row node, one of the guard's smaller outposts, disappeared. Walls intact. No blood, just gone. Everyone assigned was missing. The supplies untouched. The sigil mark scraped off the inner door. No one saw it happen. It left no trail. The only clue was a burned fragment of chalk in the center of the floor, shaped like a glyph Kren didn't recognize. The next day, a different part of the city lit a watchfire. This one crimson. That meant one thing. Full district lockdown. The last time a crimson fire burned, it took a week and 80 dead before it was extinguished. The fire was set in Dustbridge. That was not guard territory. That was someone else drawing a border. Kren stood on a rooftop, facing it. They're trying to force us to expand. Dana looked skeptical. That's suicide. No, it's a funnel. Evan cracked his knuckles. We go in, not all of us, just enough to remind them what we are. That night, 7 guards crossed the Dustbridge line. They didn't leave a mark. They didn't kill anyone. They just stood in the middle of a marked street for 1 hour, unmoving, unarmed, watching every window, then they left. The next morning, the watchfire was out. No message followed, just a new silence. Kren spent the next week preparing for something that didn't come. That was worse than the attack. The city was breathing differently. The ground had a new hum. Fewer whispers. Fewer arguments. It was the pause before a conversation started, or a weapon was drawn. The next signal came by corpse. A messenger dumped in the old bathhouse behind the cistern. Mouth sewn shut with glass thread. Fingers bent backward. Glyphs carved into his ribs. Not local language. Not any known. But the glyphs repeated. 4 symbols forming a spiral. Dina brought the sketch to Kren. It's not a threat, it's a gate. A spell. No. A place. This is a coordinate sequence. They want us to come. Trap? Guaranteed. They went anyway. The spiral led to a door buried beneath the edge of Broken Lantern Alley. Behind 2 collapsed bakeries and 1 burned workshop. The wall was newer than the stone around it. Painted gray. No marks. When Kren touched it, the glyphs shimmered and faded, revealing a narrow corridor. The 3 of them entered. No one else came. The hall twisted too many times. The turns didn't match the outside layout. The path didn't follow the city. They were in something built beneath it, around it, behind it. The kind of space only old blood knew how to carve. The room at the end held 6 people. All masked, all seated, no guards, no weapons. 1 chair waited opposite them. Kren sat. No one introduced themselves. The central figure spoke. Voice was smooth, old, genderless. You've made a problem. Kren didn't answer. You were supposed to burn out after the first retaliation. You didn't. He waited. You've made the city hesitate. You've made the people question. That cannot continue. Kren finally spoke. Then stop me. They were silent. The voice resumed. We don't want to stop you. We want to reshape you. No. You're not listening. I don't need to. You think this is about your territory, your faction. But you're pulling at a pattern older than you know. You're unraveling a knot we spent years tightening. Kren leaned forward. Good. They didn't move. You'll die, the voice said. Kren stood. So will you. He left. The door sealed behind him. The corridor no longer twisted. They exited into daylight. That night, every wall in the guard territory was painted. Not with warnings, with names. Names of the dead. Names of the vanished. Names of those who had disappeared without explanation. People started leaving offerings. Flowers, coins, gloves. And beside each mark someone had drawn the white slash. The city didn't speak, but it remembered. And Kren knew, the war had already begun. The city rumbled low in its bones, the morning after the names appeared. Not from movement or storms or magic, but from recognition. Too many people saw the painted walls. Too many lips whispered the names written on them. Too many hands traced the white slash beside each for the city to stay still. What had been a rumor was now awake. The city guards weren't just a faction anymore. They were a statement, and statements drew answers. Kren knew it as soon as he stepped outside the granary and saw the crowd that had formed along the edge of Stonecut Lane. They weren't loud, they weren't angry, they were just there, waiting. The crowd wasn't made of soldiers or gang muscle. It was shopkeepers, gutter kids, old women with cracked teeth, and men who carried scars but no weapons. They looked at him the same way they looked at fire on a winter night. Not with trust, with need. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just walked the block in silence. When he turned the corner, he heard a boy ask someone else, "That's him, isn't it?" The reply didn't reach his ears. It didn't have to. Inside, Dina was already at the main table. Maps spread out, her fingers tapping near a mark she'd added in the southern quadrant. New activity in Scrapshade. We had a runner check it last night. 3 new structures. 2 tagged with red line glyphs. 1 surrounded by mercs. Not local. Avon leaned against the far wall. Arms crossed, one knuckle split. They're testing expansion. They want to see how close they can get before we push back. Ken moved to the map, studied the distance. 2 streets out. Another week and they'll be inside our perimeter. Dina nodded. So we hit first. No. We wait. Why? Because they're building something, not claiming. That means they're not ready to defend it. Avon grunted. So we wait until they finish their plan. No. We wait until they think we don't have one. He left before the sun cleared the clouds, took Ribbon and a pair of new recruits, Mies and Barn, and circled the long path through the alley net that ran behind the southern district. Ness was quiet, observant, always marking her steps in odd little loops, like she was weaving the road as she walked. Barn was muscle, the kind that never raised his voice and never lost a fight. Wren kept watch, eyes on roofs, one hand on the blade he kept sheathed in his left boot. They didn't speak much. Ken liked it that way. The structure being built in Scrapshade wasn't military, it was ritual. 4 towers at equal distance, each wrapped in copper thread and angled toward a center point marked with smooth stone and hollow grooves. A casting site. High-level, structured, not some hedge mage trick. This was professional architecture, for flux manipulation, and it was set up just outside guard territory, not to destroy, to influence. He knelt beside the stone line, traced the grooves, and caught the edge of the pulse beneath. Slow, controlled, just barely active. Dena had been right. It wasn't ready. Ken stood, looked at Rin. "We're going to let it finish." Rin raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because when they activate it, we'll know exactly what they're trying to change. And then we ruin it." The message arrived by dusk, carried by a man with a scar across his mouth and a branded token tied to his wrist. He said nothing, just handed Kren the scroll, turned, and walked back into the streets. No escort, no threat. That was the message. Confidence. Ken opened the scroll. 5 words. "You've passed the second test." He handed it to Deno. She read it, and cursed. "They're baiting us." "I know. Then why keep playing?" "Because now we know it's a game." That night, Kren walked the new recruits through the structure of street politics. Not spells, not weapon, just balance. He showed them which blocks were neutral zones, which paths were claimed by silent factions, were not to leave signs. He taught them which doors always opened if you knocked twice, and which ones would never open no matter how loud you screamed. He showed them where to leave messages and where to burn them. He didn't talk about leadership. He talked about shape. The shape of a city that breathed with memory and punished arrogance with forgetting. By the end of the week, 3 more towers were being constructed in nearby districts. None attacked. None hidden. Each marked with a different sigil. One a flame, one a ring, one a spiral. Kren watched their progress without interference. He marked their patterns, mapped their energy, waited. He was building a shape too. Not one of stone, one of responses. He let them build, let them spread. Let them assume his silence was weakness. Then he struck. Not with spells, with questions. He sent Ness into the market circles with a story. 3 casters had vanished after visiting the towers, their names scrubbed from ledgers, their traces gone from ward. He let the rumor grow. Let it change. Let it fester. Dana followed it with a copy of the scroll and a whisper. The faction behind the towers had called it a test. A test for what people started asking. People started watching the towers at night. Some threw stones. Some drew lines. No one protected them. That was the crack. Kren pushed harder. He brought 5 witnesses to a wall behind the granary, each one with a memory of someone lost in Scrapshade. Each name was written in chalk beside the white slash. Then he walked the edge of the ritual site with gloves fully charged. No cloak, no guards. He left a mark on the central stone. 1 word, no. The towers collapsed that night, not from spell, from sabotage. Someone inside the faction pulled the thread. The flux loop broke. The copper lines snapped. The center stone cracked in half. No blood, no warning, Just failure. Kren didn't claim it, didn't speak about it. Let the city wonder. In the silence that followed, more names appeared. On walls, on doors, on the sides of flux carts and tavern stools. Not guard marks, names of the dead, names of the stolen. The city was answering. Not with allegiance, with memory. 2 days later, the council moved. Not directly, not in force. They shut down 2 markets, seized 3 known caster workshops, declared a lockdown in Half-Cut district, but they didn't touch guard ground. They moved around it like it was fire. Kren stood on the granary roof that night and watched the sky twist. Somewhere in the west, a spell had misfired. Purple haze drifted over the upper towers. Rain fell sideways. Dogs barked in reverse. No one panicked. It was just another Tuesday. Avon climbed up with a bottle. We're bigger than we meant to be. I know. People expect things now. They'll keep expecting. You going to give it to them? Only if they earn it. Below, Dene was training a new group. Ruin was repairing the door tracks. Ness was marking a new map. Farn was asleep on his feet, leaning on a broken beam. The city pulsed under it all, old and waiting. Kren whispered into the night, not for prayer, just to make it true. We're not done. And the city for the first time in years agreed. There was no declaration, no crest, no sudden burst of banners, just pressure, heavy and invisible, sliding across the streets, like mist that stung the tongue. The city had begun leaning, not physically but politically, spiritually, in its rhythm. Every faction, gang, house and contract crew had stopped pretending the city guards were just a territorial surge. No more mockery, no more paid instigators. They were shifting their weight, bracing themselves, aligning to either side of an invisible line. Kren saw it when the price of paper doubled overnight. When flux merchants began offering delay charms instead of shields. When free message runners vanished in one day, and no one asked why. The city didn't need to say it aloud. Everyone knew a tide was about to break. The difference was, this time it wasn't coming from the high towers or the old houses. It was rising from street level, from common breath, from hands that had no spellbooks and names not logged in noble registries. Dine had adjusted her drill patterns without being told. The new recruits didn't march anymore. They flowed. 5-person formations built to collapse and reform. Tighter paths, layered sigil support. She said nothing about it, just rotated them more aggressively and dismissed the weaker ones with a silent nod. Ivan spent more time training quietly with the older guard members, refining close-quarter strikes, and teaching them to fight in alleys, with sloped footing and no light. He'd started engraving chalk diagrams into the granary floor. No one asked what they meant. Rowan met with 2 of the better connected watchers, and compiled a ledger of every contracted enforcer in the city. The list was already 30 names long and growing. Ness set up a whisper network among the kids. She didn't use signal glyphs or enchanted tokens. She used toys, spun ring-colored beads, scratch patterns on coin edges. It moved faster than magic, and blended better than cloaks. Kren watched all of it without giving instruction. The guard had begun functioning like a body instead of a command. They had muscle memory now, reflect. They moved like something that had survived too many ambushes to flinch. That meant they were almost ready. But not yet. The city wouldn't challenge them openly. Not while they were still shaping. That was how the city worked. It didn't strike at growth. It struck at emergence. You were safe when you were nothing. You were safe when you were powerful. But the moment you were becoming, that's when it hit. And it hit with precision. The first incident seemed small. One of their quarter runner posts burned down. No bodies, just act. Then 3 white slashes appeared in a district the guard didn't own, placed by someone else. The shape was slightly wrong. The line angle off. Kren recognized the message. Someone was building a counterfeit. 2 days later, a group calling themselves the Grey Blades announced their intent to restore order to neglected streets. Their sigil was a white slash over a black bar. Their uniforms were pale gray. Their leader claimed to have studied with the city guard before leaving due to ideological differences. It was a lie. No one knew him. His name was Heron Vult. He carried a flux blade strapped to his back more for show than use, and spoke like someone who had practiced speeches in front of polished glass. But he didn't matter. The idea did. People didn't know the difference between the real Mark and a cop didn't know the difference between the guard's silence and Vola's posturing. That was what made it dangerous. So Kren didn't answer publicly. He walked straight into Greyblade territory alone. No gloves, no cloak, just a plain coat, boots and a belt with one knife. He didn't ask for permission, didn't challenge anyone. He walked into their claimed district, past their marks, past their guards, and found Vola giving a speech to 20 men and women in a converted warehouse, lined with sigils copied from guard records. Kren stood at the back. Vola kept talking. Didn't see him at first. Said something about balance. Something about order. Then he saw Kren. The speech trailed off. Kren didn't raise his voice. You're using our name. Vola stepped forward. We're using the name. Justice belongs to the people. You didn't earn that mark. Who said you did? I didn't say it. I built it. Vola smiled, sharp and loud. Then consider this progress. You inspired something. Kren took one step forward. Everyone flinched. Vola tried to hold his ground. You think fear is strength? No, but it's a good start. Then he walked out. The next night, the warehouse burned. No bodies, no marks, just fire. Vola vanished, the gray blades scattered, the white slashes were erased, and Kren still didn't speak about it. That was how he kept control. Not by force, not by speeches, by consistency. The city understood. That's why, when the next incident came, it didn't start in the streets. It started in the flux. The pattern changed. Subtle, citywide. The flux lines beneath the stone began pulling slightly westward. Not fast, just off enough that regular casters noticed their spells drifting. Ward lines unraveled faster. Binding charms failed under pressure. Even basic healing slowed. Benny called it thread drift. Roan called it sabotage. Kren called it preparation. Somewhere beneath the city, someone was turning the wheel. It wasn't natural. So they traced it. Took a week. Flux doesn't track like blood. It folds, reflects, slips behind itself. But Ness's kids found the pattern in chalk scrawls behind a coin fort. Then he traced the spell route through a drain channel. Roan got a location from a half-mad caster who hadn't slept in 4 days. They found it under old bricks, a defunct trading house with half its cellars collapsed and the other half turned into storage for stolen goods. Someone had built a flux engine in the foundation. Not to cast, to pull. The machine spun night soil into thread harmonics, humming softly, resonating just off-key enough to distort local flux for entire districts. It didn't need power, it needed presence. They took it apart slowly, then he mapped it. Roan drained it. Kren broke it. No announcement, no flare, just silence. And in that silence the city flickered again. The rhythm returned to normal. Spellcasters started sleeping again. Markets stopped fluctuating, and everyone noticed who had fixed it. The next day, 3 more blocks asked to be marked. Kren didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. He knew the shape of what they were now. Not rebels, not a gang, not a militia. They were something old, something the city hadn't seen in a long time. A faction with spine and memory, the kind that didn't bend when you leaned on it. And far beneath the granary, something deeper than the city stirred. It wasn't watching anymore, it was listening. The city listened in different ways now. It wasn't just the shape of the crowds or the silence in the alleyways. It was in the way spells reacted before they were cast. The way doors opened slightly slower, as if waiting to hear which side the hand belonged to. Kren didn't mark the new blocks publicly. He left the white slashes unpainted, and let the residents decide if the city guards had earned their presence. 2 appeared the same night, one on the wall of a butcher's shop, the other carved into the edge of a broken fountain. Neither were clean, both bled a little when touched. Dane confirmed the markings had been made with spell chalk dipped in old blood, a technique used by hedge casters trying to amplify emotional resonance. It worked. When people walked by those marks, they stopped talking. The city didn't just recognize the guard anymore. It felt that was a new kind of power, and Kren knew what followed. He didn't expand, he consolidated. The guard's perimeter was tightened by 1 block. Patrols doubled along vulnerable walls. Runners were retrained. Messages sent in triplicate. Charmcasters brought in for structural reinforcement. No one questioned the change. The city wasn't pressing in at the moment, but the wind was still angled wrong, and birds had stopped nesting near the cisterns. Ness found 5 different sigil shards scattered across 3 alleyways, none activated, each humming faintly when rotated. Roan identified the pattern immediately. Memory anchors. Someone was mapping guard territory from the outside using imprint magic. Kren didn't respond with a counter-scry. He walked each site in silence and marked the ground with a null rune made from ash and old thread. Dana asked him why he didn't just seal the whole block in an obfuscation net. Because they want us to hide, Kren said. I want them to see us standing still. That night, a message arrived in the shape of a man. Not written, not spoken. Just left there, folded against the back wall of the granary, neck snapped, arms positioned in the prayer pose of the old king's faith. A mark burned into the side of his cheek. Not one Kren had seen before. It pulsed with weak light, not magical but chemical, designed to flicker for a few hours before fading. A temporary curse meant for attention, not harm. He took one look and told Avon to burn the body without spell. Rowan objected. Could be a clue. Kren didn't blink. The next day, 3 crew leaders from different districts requested meetings. None were allies. None had spoken to the guard in months. All 3 arrived separately at different hours, in different disguises. Each offered something. A share in supply chains, protection routes, favor exchanges and old house circles. Each one danced around the same request. Make the guard visible in their territory, and let them tie their names to it. Kren listened to each one. He said nothing until the last left. Then he called a meeting in the granary's upper floor. No posturing, no smoke, just guard personnel, a floor map, and 3 phrases written in chalk on the main wall: visible, useful, corruptible. They want to make us part of the structure, Kren said. A known piece. Predictable, tradable. Shankite spat into a bucket. They want to sell us without paying us. Rowan nodded. If we become part of their economy, we stop being a threat. Jaina pointed at the map. But if we don't take ground, we give space back to them. Fear shrinks without presence. Kren waited until they finished. Then he stepped forward and drew a 4th word beneath the others. Sever. We split. Not territory. Identity. The guard stays clean, but we make something else. Something outside the lines. Something they can buy, bribe, poison. We feed it bad information, let it fail. Then we watch who tries to protect it. Avon stared. You want to make a fake faction? No. I want to make a decoy. Won't people die? They already are. So they built it. A shadow branch. A name with no face. Operatives that didn't know they weren't official. Charms that failed under pressure. Wards that only worked in one direction. They gave it just enough truth to survive a few weeks. Just enough failure to ensure it attracted the wrong kind of support. It worked. Within a month, the decoy was everywhere. 3 new factions approached it. 2 minor crews offered tribute. 1 merchant house paid to use its sigil on caravans. And when it collapsed, when a single caster broke the entire network with a feedback spell, the guard stepped back, didn't defend it, didn't speak for it, let it burn, and recorded every name that stepped forward to save it. That was the list they needed. Not enemies, participant, the ones willing to build scaffolds over lies. Kren folded the list into his belt and didn't share it yet. That night, he stood on the roof again, not watching for fire but listening for footsteps. The city was too quiet. Below, the wind had shifted again. It blew from the west this time, the same direction the sky turned red when the dome first fell, and the same direction Velm had vanished into months ago. Dinah joined him, not speaking at first. She carried a bottle of flux-filtered water and 2 mugs. He took one. They're not reacting like I thought. We baited them. They bit, but they didn't pull back. They've gone still. Kren nodded. They're nesting. Digging in. That means something bigger's coming. You think the council's involved? They haven't spoken yet. That's more telling than if they had. What happens when they do? Kren drained the cup. Then we find out what the city really remembers. The days that followed were filled with murmurs. No violence, no raids, just quiet visits, unusual market movements, strange behavior from low-level casters. The wind kept shifting. Magic felt heavier, like it was coiling, waiting. The city was drawing breath, and when it exhaled, Kren knew it wouldn't be with words. It would be with blood. He just didn't know whose yet. The city exhaled just before second bell, not in sound or tremor, but in the way things moved. Doors swung slower, boots echoed deeper, spelllight flickered longer than it should have, and people who normally walked with heads down started glancing over their shoulders without knowing why. Kren knew the signs well enough by now. Something had been activated, subtle, wide, woven through the city's spine, with threads older than half the stone it stood on. Dana picked up on it too. She was mid-drill, explaining the rotation timing between counter-sigils in a 3-layer formation, when her tone changed mid-sentence, and her next order came with a sharper edge. The recruits responded instantly. They'd stopped needing to be told everything. They were learning the temp. Kren didn't call a meeting. He just walked through each of the blocks under their protection, starting with Millshade and ending in Lowbrick. By the time he returned to the granary, Aveen, Rowan and Dana were waiting. Ness wasn't back yet, and that bothered him. She was running a circuit through the southern fringe, mapping possible retreat corridors and marking shadow routes only kids would dare squeeze through. She was fast, silent and creative, but if something had gone wrong before he could speak, a knock tapped twice, then paused, then one. Not a guard code. Old street pattern. Kren nodded to Rowan, who drew his blade and opened the side panel. A single child stepped through, no older than 10, holding a coin with a diagonal cut through the center. Ness's code. The kid didn't say anything. just held up a hand. A shape was scratched into his palm. A crude spiral, lines intersecting wrong but close enough. She saw it, the boy whispered. She said to go. Kren stood. Where? Stonewater Edge. Behind the dye yards. Rowan was already moving. Dana grabbed her casting belt and followed. Kren didn't say a word. Stonewater Edge was 30 minutes from the granary on a fast run. Less if you cut across rooftops and took the garden drops past Carver's Hook. The dye yards were quiet. Always were. Especially after dusk. Flux runoff made the ground unsteady and burned the air just enough to keep loiterers out. They found Ness behind a rusted vat, legs curled, coat pulled tight, one blade drawn but unbloodied. I'm not touched, she said before anyone asked. But it was close. What happened? She pointed toward the stone arch built into the back of the yard wall. It had never been there before, not in the old maps, not in memory, not even in the dozen sketches Ness had done over the past week. It wasn't new. It was revealed. The arch wasn't made of city stone. The blocks were older, layered with a different kind of sediment, veins of silver ore and something darker that shimmered beneath torchlight. Sigils lined the inner edge, 6 layers deep, looping back over themselves, not just casterwork. This was structure magic, architecture built on resonance and will. Dana circled it once. It's not active, not in the way we'd think. Rowan tested the ground. Feels hollow underneath. Kren stepped forward. He didn't touch it, just let his presence settle. The arch warmed slightly. Hum began. Dana took a step back. It's reacting to you. It's recognizing me. That was the difference. He pressed his palm flat against the center stone. Nothing opened, but something answered. A low throb in the back of his teeth. A flicker behind the eye. A pressure against the ribs, like he'd forgotten something important decades ago, and was only now remembering what shape it had taken. Then it stopped. He stepped back. We sealed this, he said, permanently. Dina hesitated. You sure? This wasn't meant for us. It was left for us. That means someone planned this. Trap? Worse. It's a door. Not for us to enter. For something else to exit. They marked the site, warded it, covered it. Posted watchers with full casting approval. Nothing flashy. Nothing that drew attention. Then they went back and waited. The next 3 days were thin. No attacks. No political messages. The markets flowed again. The outer districts held their distance. Even the merchants who normally sent backhand offers stopped visiting. It was too clean, which made the scream more obvious. It came from Frostedge, a narrow corner street barely clinging to the outer reach of Gord territory. One voice, sharp and subtle. By the time Kren arrived, the crowd had already formed. At the center, a boy knelt beside a man who wasn't breathing. The body wasn't injured. No wounds. No blood. Just collapsed. Dead with his eyes open, mouth forming the start of a word. Dana arrived 2 minutes later, scanned the area, and cast a quick resonance sweep. There was nothing, except the faint trace of an unmarked glyph. It hovered in the air for a moment, spun, and disappeared. Kren stared at the boy. What did he? The boy shook his head. He said your name. No one spoke after that. The crowd dispersed. The wind shifted again. Kren didn't return to the granary. He walked the city alone that night. Back through low brick, through the old prayer lane, past the sewer grates and hidden stairwells he used to sleep beside as a child. The city didn't feel familiar. It felt aware. He turned a corner and found Velm waiting. Same hood, same eyes, same silence. I saw your shadow, Velm said. It's not mine, doesn't matter. It's walking with your face. Kren nodded. How long do we have? Until it forgets why it was made. What happens then? Velm smiled. Then it tries to remember by killing everyone who doesn't match. Kren stepped forward. Is it me? Velm's eyes went still. It wants to be. Then he was gone. The next morning, Rowan found a sigil carved into the granary floor. It hadn't been there before. It wasn't drawn. It had grown. A spiral, 5-pointed, pulsing with soft light. Everyone gathered. Dennis stared. It's a link. To what? Kren didn't answer. He already knew. It was a mirror, and something had started to reflect. The spiral returned in silence. It didn't rise through the floor or sear into walls with light or sound. It simply reappeared, perfectly centered along the granary's north entrance, etched deep into the brick as if the stone had accepted it without question. It was no longer a question of how it got there or when it moved. Those answers had stopped mattering. What mattered was that it was choosing where to be. The first to see it was Rowan, returning from a night rotation across Lowbrick. He didn't call out or warn anyone. He just stood in front of it, one hand resting on the hilt of his blade, eyes locked on the center of the spiral, until the others came looking for him. Dena arrived first, followed by Ness, Avon, 2 of the senior runners, and finally Kren. all of them moving quietly, instinctively, the way people do when they know they're approaching something sacred or something wrong. No one spoke. The spiral pulsed when Kren stepped into view. A faint throb like breath under stone. Once then still, he didn't stop. He walked straight up to it, arms at his sides, coat brushing his legs, boots loud against the courtyard stone. He stared at it with the same calm he used on the night he walked into 3 overlapping gangs alone, and made them back down by speaking exactly 5 words. No fear, no challenge, just presence. A ripple moved through the stone around the spiral, not bright, not loud, barely visible. Dana reached for her charm band, and stopped herself. Rowan flexed his fingers. Ness had already moved to high position with 2 backup runners, shadowing her. Avon waited for an order that never came. Kren stood still and let the thing respond. It didn't lash out, didn't expand, pulsed again, slower. The air grew heavy, the kind of weight that settles on you before a lightning strike. Then he spoke, voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you," the spiral answered with one final pulse. Then the air broke, not with sound or heat, but with stillness. A quiet so complete the city seemed to stop breathing. Then the first flake of ash drifted from the sky. It wasn't fireborn, no smoke, no heat. The sky above held no clouds, no flame, no rupture, but the ash came anyway. Thin, gray, cold. It floated downward in slow, spiraling drifts, touching rooftops, coats, blades, the kind of ash that fell in old myths, the kind they said signaled the end of a city's innocence. Dana touched a flake, and winced. This isn't burn ash, it's memory dust. Condensed recollection. Something's filtering thought through the sky. Kren turned his gaze upward and let the flakes fall on his shoulders without brushing them away. Across guard territory reports came in. One spiral in Dust Court began pulsing erratically. Another was found broken in the stone of an old sewer outflow. Beneath the market fringe, a third had been scrawled, not grown, not burned, but scrawled in blood, onto the back of a missing enforcer from the rivet spine. He was alive when they found him. Seated upright, laughing softly, mouth filled with broken teeth. He hadn't lost yet. The ash thickened. Vel returned. He didn't arrive by road. One moment the chapel underblock was empty. The next, he was there, sitting at the edge of a prayer pit long gone dry. Kren didn't speak first. Velm looked thinner, worn out, eyes sunken deep, hands trembling as if holding something unseen. "You said it wasn't you," he said quietly. "But it is. Not the version you remember. The one you buried. The one who didn't stop. The one who thought fear was cleaner than compromise. That version's crawling out of the spiral and into the cracks of the city." "I killed that man," Kren said. Velm shook his head. "You changed uniforms. He changed forms." Kren asked the question slowly. "Can it be stopped?" "No," Velm answered, "but it can be chosen. By me, by everyone else." Velm stood, staggered, faded without another word. The next morning, the spiral on the granary wall was gone again. In its place was something simpler, a handprint, human-sized, impossibly deep, not burned or painted but compressed into the brick, as if the stone had softened just long enough to remember the shape. Dana scanned it twice before she said anything. "It's your hand," she whispered. Kren looked at it, said nothing. Rowan brought word that the council was starting to move, quietly, subtly. Pulling assets from the outer districts, closing supply chains to guard friendly merchants, redirecting flux shipments. It wasn't a direct attack, it was leverage. The kind of pressure that told the city we won't kill them, but we won't feed them either. Kren met with 6 captains that evening. No formal speech, no promises. He just laid out what he knew and what came next. This is no longer about holding streets. This is about holding identity. We don't defend territory, we defend meaning. The spiral appeared again before dawn, not on stone this time, on flesh. Carved into the back of one of the guard's own runners, a girl named Hessa, just 17. She'd gone missing for 6 hours, returned without injury, but the mark was there beneath her skin, under a thin veil of untouched flesh. No scar, no pain, just a spiral of veins turned inward, forming the exact symbol without a single incision. Hessa didn't know it was there until Dana scanned her. She cried when she saw it. "I didn't let it in," she said. Kren put a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't have to." He didn't order exile. He didn't call her corrupted. He kept her close. That night, the ash fell harder, thicker. It coated guard streets like snow, muted sound, blanketed rooftops. No fire, no source. Just constant descent. And across the city, 12 spirals lit up at once. Dana watched from the roof. Rowan stood silent. Ness marked every location. Avon waited by the door. Kren stood beneath the sky and felt the ash settle into the creases of his coat, the corners of his eyes, the space between breaths. It didn't burn, it understood. He turned once, faced the granary wall, and spoke without raising his voice. "I know what you are." The city listened, and the spiral pulsed once, slowly, like a breath drawn inward before a word was spoken. The pulse didn't fade. It lingered in the bones of the granary, in the joints of the walls, in the fibers of every coat and banner in the guard's hold. It wasn't sound, it wasn't pressure, it was presence. Like the city itself had finally decided to speak. After years of quiet observation, Kren didn't respond. He stood facing the wall for another hour after the pulse faded, not because he expected more, but because he knew silence was part of the message. This wasn't a warning, it was recognition. Dana was the first to break the stillness. She walked to the center of the granary floor, and drew a chalk line through the space the spiral had once marked. No spell, no glyph, just a line. Then she stepped back and nodded. "It stopped moving," she said. "It's weight." Roan appeared at the stairwell, his coat covered in fine ash, eyes sharp. "The city's gone quiet again. No spirals in new territory. No sigils, no strange movements. People are watching from windows, like they're expecting us to speak first." Ness confirmed the same from the North Road. Markets are holding breath. Gang signs are getting scrubbed. Even the Fluxbond crews have paused route casting. It wasn't peace. It was a pause in the tension before recoil. Kren issued no orders. He walked the guard perimeter alone, slowly, coat open, gloves unstrapped. Every street had changed. The ash made it look uniform, like the city was trying to hide its cracks under a single color. He passed 4 people sweeping stoops. 2 nodded. 1 bowed. The last didn't look at him, but stepped aside with reverence. That was the part he hated most. Not the enemies, not the spirals, not even the city's shifting mood. It was the reverence. It meant he was becoming a symbol again. He returned to the granary after dusk. Eben had reinforced the new entry points, with steel posts and tethered chime note. Danar worked over the east corridor, re-engraving the spell steel with high-resistance bindings in case someone tried to pulse-cast a collapse ward through the outer stones. Renan had the rotation schedules updated and copied across 6 message paths. Ness didn't report she'd been gone for 5 hours. When she returned, she said nothing, handed Kren a burned scrap of old wood, and disappeared upstairs. The wood was part of a sign, letters almost gone. 3 were visible. CTY. Dina sighed and frowned. "Where?" "Foundry District," Kren said. She went digging. "Do you know what this was?" "Yes." The ash thickened that night. Not enough to choke, but enough to silence footsteps. Kren sat alone beneath the open roof, watching it settle into the spaces between beams. For a long time, he thought about the man he used to be, the one who punched people for answers, who treated every injustice like a broken machine he had the right to dismantle. The spiral wasn't foreign. It wasn't invader magic, it was a consequence. It was every choice, every moment of control forged into something sharp enough to act, without hesitation. At midnight, another body appeared, left standing in front of the granary. Not a guard, not a rival, just someone who looked too familiar. It wore Kren's coat. It moved like Kren. It even had his gloves, the old ones, the pair he burned a year ago after they'd fused to his skin during the Alm Square raid. Rowan held position from the tower. Dina moved to flank. Avon was already behind the alley post. No one spoke. Kren stepped outside. The thing didn't move. "Why are you here?" Kren asked. It tilted its head. "You can't be me," Kren said. "I haven't stopped moving long enough to leave a shadow." Still no movement. Then it blinked, once, and vanished. No trace, no pulse, just gone. "An echo," Dina said. "No," Kren answered. "A rehearsal. For what?" None of them asked, because they already understood. 3 nights passed. No spirals appeared. No ash fell. The street seemed to wake again, slowly, awkwardly. Patrols resumed. Trade resumed. But no one stopped watching. At dawn on the 4th day, a new message arrived. Not on parchment, not by runner. A phrase scratched into the edge of the stone above the granary's main gate. 6 words. "Let it become what you won't." Dina read it 3 times. Rowan offered no opinion. Avin looked to Kren. He said nothing. Later that night, Ness handed him a book. Thin, hand-bound, old, title etched in oil Cha's City Guard Charter Draft. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "North Archive Pit. Found it under 4 collapsed shelves." Kren opened it. The first page held a single name. His own. and a date from a year he didn't remember living. He read it cover to cover. It wasn't a strategy guide. It wasn't a record. It was an idea, half-formed, filled with principles, language that sounded like him but colder, more confident. It had been written as if someone had followed him for years and tried to codify his instinct into policy. Someone's building a version of us without us, Dinah said. Kren closed the book. Not someone, he said. That night he stood alone in the empty market square, where the first mark had ever appeared. He didn't speak. He didn't draw his blade. He just watched the ash falling in slow spirals, and let the city look back at him through the mark he left behind.